At the moment, Asia for Animals now has 8 member working groups that bring our members together to collaborate in particular areas of animal advocacy, such as social media, animal cruelty, farm animal welfare, issues affecting dogs and cats, helping organizations understand policy and advocacy, finding solutions to humans and macaque interactions, enhancing the existing wealth of skills and capacity in animal protection organizations across Asia. And of course, we also have the Sanctuaries and Rescue Centers coalitions. So the Policy Coalitions is one of the working groups under Asia for Animals. We aim to provide support to our member with appeal letters, build a database of upcoming events to watch out for, give policy context, terminology, policy analysis, organize capacity building events to introduce best practices, mapping out policy needs in Asia through one-on-one conversations or surveys. We also support international working groups to engage Asian member states to support international initiatives from the UN and others. We would like to expand a better coverage of memberships in South Asia and West Asia in this year and 2024. With that, as the conclusions of the housekeeping, I would like to hand over the floor to our first moderators of today's event, Ms. Pavitra Krishnan, our Capacity in Animal Protections Coalition Coordinator. Pavitra is passionate about making the world a just and equitable place for all living beings and has experience of working in both the animal and human rights space. Her past experience includes working with the Federation of Indian Animals Protection Organizations, or FIAPO, in government advocacy and policy regulations aimed towards the welfare of farmed animals. Further, she has worked with TechnoReserve on a livelihood enhancement project for smallholders farmers in India. Pavitra led the Global Majority Program at 50 by 40, a coalition of organization dedicated to cutting the global production and consumption of animal products by 50% by 2040. She holds a master in economics and a postgraduate degree in development management. At present, Pavitra is coordinator of Capacity in Animal Protections Coalition at Asia for Animals. And welcome to the first session of today's event called Effective Communication in Policy Advocacy, Lessons Learned. The floor is yours, Pavitra. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Naukan. Hi, everyone. A very good morning, afternoon, or evening to you all, depending on where you're joining us from. As Naukan mentioned, my name is Pavitra, and I work as a coordinator at the Asia for Animals Coalition, and I'm going to be your moderator for the first session on effective communication and policy advocacy. We're absolutely delighted to have 4 wonderful speakers here with us today who will walk us through their own experiences in the space of policy advocacy and the lessons they have learned over the years on what the best practices are when it comes to local and international advocacy programs. So without further ado, let me introduce our first speakers. We have Nina Jamal and Teresa Pegger from 4PAWS. Nina is the International Head of Pandemics and Campaign Strategies at 4PAWS International, which is a global animal welfare organization for animals under direct human influence. Before this, Nina has led the international campaigns on farm animals and nutrition campaigns at 4PAWS, and she's also worked in the climate movement on campaigns and international policy with the UNFCCC negotiations, as well as in the private sector. She has a background in environmental health sciences, public health, and international environment policy. Welcome, Nina. We also have Teresa, who manages 4PAWS work on pandemic prevention via the promotion of a One Health approach together with Nina since 2020. Teresa has worked for 4PAWS International since 2016 and took on different roles striving towards the improvement of animal welfare and protecting human health. Before joining 4PAWS, she was employed at a consultancy working in the care sector, and she holds a master's degree in human-animal interaction as well as in international economics at the University of Innsbruck, Austria. Before I pass it on to the speakers, a quick reminder that we will be having a Q&A session towards the end of all the presentations. So if you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the comment box. We have our team collating the questions for later. Over to you, Nina and Teresa.
Thank you very much. I will just quickly share my screen so that you can see our presentation. Okay, you should be able to see it now.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great, perfect. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. We are looking forward to talk about our work on pandemics and animal welfare. So we'll tell you about external developments. We will tell you about the evolution of our campaign and also the learnings from our work with national governments as well as with international institutions. Thank you very much for the introduction already. So I won't go into detail anymore. You should know us already. Thanks for the first introduction by our moderator. You can find here also our email addresses on the presentation, which we are happy to share afterwards so that you can reach out in case of questions or feedback. So before we start, I would like to ask you a question. When you think of pandemics, when you think of COVID-19, in one word, what comes to your mind? Nina will be so kind and add this link to the chat. Please click on the link in the chat, the one which you can also see here on the slide. Then a window will open and you can add up to 3 words, and then we will see what happens. So please, Nina, if you could share the link in the chat, and everyone go to the website and add what comes to your mind when you think of pandemics. We will give you a minute and then we will continue. Is everything working? Does everyone know what to do? Few more seconds.
The image in the presentation. So if you reshare your slide, we should be able to see the responses.
Okay. Ah, I can see it already. Amazing. So what you can see here is a word cloud. So that's what the words which you can see in bigger means that these words have been mentioned several times by you. So we can see here that words which come to your mind first are health, disease, infectious, imbalance. We can also see here quite tiny animal welfare, and that's exactly why we started our campaign. Because the problem from the very beginning was that national governments and international institutions did not really link it to animal health and welfare. And given that 75% of emerging infectious diseases originate in animals, that's not really working. So we started this campaign to address countries and also international institutions to focus to a more holistic understanding of health, which also acknowledges the role of animal health and animal welfare and the prevention of pandemic. So let's go back to the beginnings of our work. It's the year 2019. First outbreaks of COVID-19 are happening. The disease quickly spreads across countries, killing around 7 million people until now, bringing a lot of suffering, leading to isolation, confronting us with high costs and a lot of other negative experiences and feelings. So it's clear we never want this to happen again.
And as Teresa mentioned in the beginning, so the public health emergency of international concern was first announced in February 2020. And back then, when we looked at the news as animal welfare organizations, we saw messages about how the world was dangerously underprepared for the next pandemic, how this is more than just a health crisis, that vulnerable people in poor countries will suffer. It's an economic crisis. And we only saw very little reporting on the role of our relationship to animals, and this was very concerning to us. So we gathered as NGOs, we brought the coalitions together, and we started developing our own strategy. We started figuring out, how do we want our policymakers to tackle this problem? And we developed a strategy. By October 2020. The World Federation for Animals had published a manifesto by animal welfare organizations calling for prevention by tackling the root causes. Several NGOs started engaging with their supporters, asking them to call on decision makers to prevent the next pandemic. And for us, it was clear, right? So it was clear that this emergency was a product of our dysfunctional relationship to animals and the environment. This is what caused this. And luckily, by October 2020, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPBS, published a wonderful workshop paper. It was so helpful and important to have that paper as a resource for us as policy campaigners, because what they were calling for was, they said, we need a high-level panel on prevention to tackle the One Health challenge. We need to tackle the drivers of these outbreaks. We need to reduce pandemic risk due to wildlife trade, due to our relationship with animals, animal cruelty. We need to bridge the knowledge gaps, share information with each other, and we need to involve all sectors of society. This is not just a human health challenge. This is a holistic challenge. So we found ourselves in the middle of an exciting paradigm shift. We were worried at the beginning that it was just the animal welfare organizations who were going to talk about animal cruelty, but we saw more support from science behind our calls. We saw calls for a One Health approach. We saw calls for tackling the drivers of outbreaks, tackling the interconnection between humans, animals, and the environment. So we're in the middle of a paradigm shift that we need to see follow through. And this is currently what we're focusing on as NGOs. So we're not just talking about factory farming, wildlife trade, cage keeping, the way we're treating animals per se. We're talking about how animals fit into the bigger picture. We're talking about the need to no longer treat human health in isolation. We need to tackle human health through a One Health approach, where we look at our connection with animals and the environment. We can no longer treat health as a symptom control approach. We need to tackle the root causes of what's driving health risks by also tackling the way we're treating animals and the environment. We need to move away from developing policies in silos where the Human Health Ministry only becomes involved after the crisis. We need to develop strategies through collaboration, because this is where we solve the problem before it becomes a problem. We need to move away from an anthropocentric and human-centered way of defining health to a more ecocentric approach, where we're also looking at how human activity affects animals and the environment and how it makes them sick and then makes us sick. And we need to stop seeing health in our economies as a financial burden. We need to see it as an investment. We need to invest in health for all. So animals were becoming part of something much bigger, something that was not just about the animals. If we treat the animals well, humans also benefit. And then it started getting more exciting. So by October 2020, we had the science behind us, and then the policymakers started taking action as well. By November 2020, in the Paris Peace Forum, the Food and Agriculture Organization, WHO, World Organization for Animal Health, and UNEP, they agreed to work together to form this high-level expert panel that the IPBS were calling for. And governments like France and Germany were supporting this. In November as well, President Charles Michel of the European Council was talking about a proposal for an international treaty on pandemics. So we started getting more motivated, something was going to happen. And we saw then the G7 summit in February 2021 also where the EU was advocating for such a pandemic treaty, and the G7 were backing it. So momentum started building, and then, so what we're trying to share here is, and say, what we're doing, what we're advocating for, always has to be combined with developments among policymakers in the outside world. And all of these developments helped us figure out who to engage with, which member states to meet, which member states to encourage. And by March 2021, a group of countries, together with the WHO and the EU, together in opinion editorial on the WHO website, called for the creation of a pandemic instrument. However, they were not talking about prevention. They were just talking about preparedness. They were talking about One Health, which was great, but they were not talking about prevention. This is where we started getting concerned. And our worries were confirmed. In May, every May, there's a World Health Assembly. And in the World Health Assembly, the 74th one in 2021, member states agreed to organize a special session by November that year. And they were talking about developing an international instrument on preparedness and response. They were talking about, we need to be better prepared for the next pandemic, but they were not talking about the need to prevent it. And this is where our mobilization and advocacy activities intensified. So what we did was we worked with scientists from several disciplines, 20 scientists from all over the world, different disciplines, and we asked them that question. Do you think member states should prepare for the next pandemic or prevent it? What is the role of animals? What is the role of animal welfare? And we prepared a report based on those findings. It was the future report on how to prevent the next pandemic. And all the experts from all of the disciplines were talking about the need to tackle the root causes, the need to make the One Health approach even more holistic, to include animal welfare, to include well-being more intensively there. Several NGOs started calling for the need to prevent the next pandemic. During the World Health Summit in October 2021, we were out there as NGOs calling for prevention. We met with policymakers from as many countries that would meet with us. We wrote letters to international institutions talking about the need for prevention. And that was when we noticed the aha moment was emerging. Because luckily, by November 2021, member states, so this was the first draft decision before the official decision, and the draft decision on the weekend before the end of the special session, member states called for an international instrument to prevent, prepare, and respond to the next pandemic. And this was a key moment for us because it meant we can call for a One Health approach, we can call for tackling the root causes, we can talk about the need to prevent spillover, but we're not there yet. So with international advocacy campaigns, we always need allies. It's not just about what we think as animal welfare organizations. We need the people who member states listen to say the same thing as we are saying. And luckily, the Global Health Center in Geneva, together with member states, held a workshop on the topic of deep prevention. So when does prevention begin? Does it begin after the health emergency, like the health policy experts are trained, or does it begin before that? Does it begin at the stage of tackling the root causes? And in that amazing policy brief, they were talking about the need to prevent spillover, the need to prevent the pathogen from jumping to from animals to humans. They were talking about integrated surveillance, collecting data from all the sectors so that we can figure out how pathogens are moving so that we can better prevent. They were talking about the need to tackle zoonotic diseases through regulations, and they were talking about wildlife, farms, all the hotspots and the activities that need to be prioritized. They were talking about linking science to policy, that we develop policies based on science, that we integrate and collaborate across sectors, across the human, animal, environment sectors, nationally, internationally. And that was our favorite part of the report, because they were saying that the pandemic instrument needs to tackle the spillover. It needs to tackle and prevent the point of a pathogen jumping from animals to humans. So they were basically calling for an expansion of the way that we define human health. And we need to tackle the way we treat animals in the environment in the pandemic instrument. And that report, that policy brief, was published right before our very first policy event in Geneva. So this was one of the tactics that we used. We invited member states who are based in Geneva, because this is where the World Health Organization is based, to an event with experts. And we asked experts about the One Health approach, prevention, how that could be integrated into the pandemic instrument. And that event that we held was a week before member states were planning to meet and talk about the pandemic instrument. And luckily, after that event, we were watching the statements by the member states, and we started hearing more and more calls for One Health, for prevention, for tackling the crisis through a holistic approach. And by that time, we realized we were no longer talking about factory farming, wildlife trade, antimicrobial resistance. We're no longer talking about classical animal welfare. We started talking about policy. And the challenges that we had to have discussions with member states about were, what is the scope of the pandemic treaty? Does it cover the entire pathway of prevention, preparedness, and response? What is the role of the WHO? Is the role of the WHO to tackle prevention at the stage where animals are getting sick? Or should they better collaborate with other institutions? Should we encourage collaboration on the national level between the human health, animal welfare, and environment sectors? We're talking about what obligations should be in the instrument, whether member states can implement these obligations, whether financing can be available to support member states in these steps that they need to take. So we were taking the expert calls for policy improvements, like the knowledge to policy transformation, holistic approach, and we were taking them and we were using them to build a stronger case for animal welfare.
Thanks, Nina. So our ambitious goals, we are starting from a situation where human behavior leads to animal suffering and at the same time puts human health at risk, towards a situation where we have improved animal welfare and ending high-risk practices, and at the same time protecting human health and nature. So we identified different instruments and processes which are relevant. Nina already mentioned the International Instrument on Pandemic Prevention, Preparedness and Response. Additionally, there is the political declaration on pandemic prevention, preparedness and response, which will be the outcome of the upcoming United Nations General Assembly. So this is being negotiated or has been negotiated by UN member states in New York. And also of importance are national and international One Health strategies. And all of these instruments need to be grounded on One Health, because only if the animals and nature are healthy, also humans are healthy. So, which means that we need to address the root causes, which are land use change, biodiversity loss, factory farming, wildlife trade, and many more. Additionally, in order to make these preventive measures happen, we need financial means. So financing and incentives are also very important in our strategy. You can see here again what we want to achieve and how we want to achieve it. So by following a One Health approach to enable effective pandemic prevention. And this happens by lobbying national governments and international stakeholders. So you can see here on this little visual the key institutions and targets we are lobbying. So for sure the WHO, because the pandemic instrument is happening under the WHO constitution in collaboration with the other quadripartite institutions, which are the United Nations Environment Programme, the Food and Agriculture Organization to the United Nations, and the World Organization for Animal Health, so the formerly OIE. Additionally, of importance is the World Bank, because under the World Bank there is a pandemic fund, which aims at providing financial support to countries. And here we want to ensure that it's not just about preparedness and response measures, but that it also includes measures aimed at preventing pandemics at source. So another win, which happened in October last year, was the One Health Joint Plan of Action. It was developed to prevent future zoonotic pandemics and to promote health sustainably through the One Health approach. It is built around 6 action tracks, which are enhancing One Health capacities to strengthen health systems, reducing the risks from emerging and re-emerging zoonotic epidemics and pandemics, controlling and eliminating endemic, zoonotic, neglected tropical and vector-borne diseases, strengthening the assessment and management of food safety risks, integrating the environment into One Health, very important, curbing the silent pandemic of antimicrobial resistance. So these are the 6 action tracks. And what we like very much about the One Health Joint Plan of Action is that it calls for adopting upstream prevention measures. So that means prevention measures before the spillover to humans happens. So really addressing the root causes, the relationship between humans and animals. And additionally, it aims at restoring biodiversity. Another very positive development, and we called it here a revolutionary rethinking, is the white paper by the One Health high-level expert panel, which defines prevention as prevention of spillover. So that's exactly what we want. We want to move from a reactive to a proactive approach. We want to address the drivers of disease emergence. We want to address the anthropogenic, so the human-centered factors and activities that increase spillover risk, because this is exactly where we can achieve animal welfare improvements. Still, we are confronted with several challenges. As you are all aware, we are still in times of war, in times of energy crisis, in terms of climate and food crisis. Global South and Global North are following different interests, with the Global North focusing more on health and prevention, and the Global South focusing more on the equitable division of vaccines and post-outbreak equity. So we want to build bridges. We want to unite developing and developed countries to work together to build trust and to effectively prevent future pandemics. Additionally, ministries and departments still tend to work in silos, but with One Health, it is crucial that relevant stakeholders work together. So as Nina said, it's not just a WHO or human health topic anymore. It's a holistic problem, and we need to solve it together. So we need a joint approach where the relevant stakeholders work together across departments and ministries. Additionally, we are still promoting the acknowledgement of the importance of an effective preventive approach. So the improvement of animal health and animal welfare, addressing the root causes at the human-animal environment interface. Nina also mentioned it, we need to move from GDP to well-being. So here it's very important to balance economic and well-being interests. But what we could see and what really helps us with our argumentation is that prevention is the most cost-effective approach. Prevention only costs part of preparedness and response. So that's really important to remember. And what is especially interesting for you is that some Asian and African countries, some are, but some are not yet convinced of One Health and use it as a bargaining chip. So we aim at building strong relationship with governments through our allies and networks in these regions to convince them to follow a One Health approach to pandemic prevention. So in order to overcome these obstacles and challenges, we continued our efforts, and at the last World Health Assembly, we organized a side event. You can see here on the slide the speakers. The title was One Health in Practice. So how can we prevent the next pandemic before communities suffer? Here the equity argument is very crucial. So we can only enable equity if we prevent pandemics. So if we prevent a spillover from happening. We did this event together with a group of Friends of One Health, which was really a big achievement for us because the group of Friends of One Health is quite a big group of countries of WHO member states promoting the One Health approach. So for example, these include Australia, Belgium, Brunei, Canada, Denmark, Fiji, France, Germany, India, Indonesia, Kenya, Mexico, Netherlands, and so on and so on. So I won't tell you all of them, but it's quite a lot of countries. So the question is, where does that leave us now? The political declaration, which I mentioned before, has been finalized now. So it includes the necessity to follow a One Health approach and also includes the reference to the just mentioned One Health joint plan of action. This is really good. It also mentions the drivers of outbreaks and that there is a need to address the outbreaks, even though it does not mention the specific drivers, but that's also a good development. And additionally, it underlines the importance of collaboration among the quadripartite institutions, so WHO, FAO, WA, and UNEP, as well as policy coherence. So it's really important that it's not just a human health topic, as I already mentioned, they need to work across disciplines. What is still lacking, as I just mentioned, really mentioning the concrete drivers and high-risk practices, such as wildlife trade, and measures how we can address these high-risk practices. But still, it sends a very important signal to the negotiations which are happening in Geneva, so the negotiations around the pandemic instrument. And this political declaration will be the outcome of the high-level meeting on pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response, which is part of the United Nations General Assembly. That's where all the UN member states meet annually, which is happening in September, towards the end of September, so very soon. So we will keep you posted. Then when we have a look again at the status quo of the pandemic treaty, the latest version is called the IMB Bureau text. It includes a One Health approach as per the definition of the One Health high-level expert panel. It references the drivers such as land use change, wildlife trade, and antimicrobial resistance. And it also includes a reference to other relevant instruments, because the pandemic instrument cannot cover all upstream drivers. So it's important that it references other relevant instruments which are addressing the phase before it comes to a spillover. What it still lacks is focus on effective prevention. At the moment, it's very much about surveillance, about containing diseases, about early detection of diseases, but we need to ensure that it's not happening. That's really the key. So equity is at risk. It also hasn't yet mentioned the One Health Joint Plan of Action, which is important because it includes upstream measures. And the key articles 4 and 5 are still optional. So member states have still the possibility to vote against them. So we are still very much pushing towards inclusion of One Health and prevention in the IMB Bureau text. So to sum up everything what we just explained and tell you about the learnings from our work with national governments and international institutions, we created this slide here so that you don't have to remember everything, but I think this is the key slide for your policy and advocacy campaigns. What should we keep in mind and what are the prerequisites for successful advocacy? Nina, I think you want to start.
Yes. Yes, I got a message from Gokhan that our time is up. So I don't know, Gokhan, shall we leave it at this and hand back over?
Yes, I think that a few key summary is okay.
Okay.
Thank you, wonderful. So as you noticed, we're not just only talking about animal welfare. We had to use a big toolbox of actions, events, reaching out to diplomats, talking in their language, adapting our messages, short briefings and strong briefings, because these are diplomats who are tackling so many different topics. So we had to adapt to the audiences. We had to build trust because this is a situation where we need allies across all sectors. There was always a need for a balance. We share information, we get information in return. We needed to remain quick, flexible, and act as reliable partners. Teresa?
We also need to build relationships. So as our colleague always say, they need to become our friends. We need to remember national holidays, build up a personal relationship. We also need to identify the stakeholders our targets are listening to, so experts or advisors who are collaborating with them and influence those. We also need to appear professionally. We need branded materials. We need to prepare our meetings and events, to do a lot of research before we go into meetings. We also need expertise, so build up our own expertise on the topic, but also collaborating with expert allies. And we need also the balance between the supportive and the critical voice. So we need to be a supportive, strong partner, but the protecting mother at the same time. And we need to find the balance here. Additionally, we need to dream big. So we need to set our outcomes really high, because these processes take a lot of time, a lot of developments, but we need to always have in mind the overall goal we want to achieve one day. And if you are interested in collaborating with us on that topic, on pandemics and animal welfare, feel free to reach out to us. We have a network of NGOs, around 30 NGOs. We are meeting monthly and talking about the latest developments and plans. So if you like, just text us and we are happy to add you to our network. What you can do is building up a relationship with your governments, influencing them on One Health and prevention, and of course, tracking political developments, which could be helpful. So thank you very much for listening. I hope this was interesting and helpful. And if you have any questions, always feel free to reach out to us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Nina. Thank you, Teresa. That was a very insightful presentation. And thank you for driving home the point that it's important to not work in silos, especially in the wake of the pandemic, and how important it is to work with policymakers in order to prevent another pandemic. So for the next presentation, we have Mary McKinnon, who is a scientific officer specializing in farmed animal welfare at SPCA in New Zealand. She has a master's in animal welfare science, ethics, and law from the University of Edinburgh. Mary has worked for SPCA for over 2 years, and prior to that at the Ministry of Primary Industries for 8 years. Her current role involves both science and policy, including working closely with government and industry to advocate for better animal welfare standards. Over to you, Mary.
Hi, everyone. I'll just share my screen. Just one moment. Right, hopefully everyone can see that. And you can hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yes, great. Awesome. Thank you. Right, so kia ora koutou, or hi, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Pavitra. Yeah, so I'm calling in from New Zealand today and here to speak to you about our experience from SPCA communicating with policymakers and government. Also include a little bit of experience from my time in government and any tips that I have from that. I want to focus today especially on talking directly to policy staff and decision makers. Not so much on the public campaigning kind of thing, but being around the table, especially today I want to talk about writing. So writing submissions, writing letters, techniques for making impactful arguments, ways to have policymakers listen to what you say. And yeah, as mentioned, I have a background in central government in New Zealand. So some of this is informed by SPCA's advocacy work in the last couple of years, and some of it is informed by my experience there. So firstly, I wanted to set the scene a little bit about what's happening in New Zealand, as I'm not sure to what extent these tips will work worldwide, but at least I can give you some context for what we are working with in New Zealand. So we have one Animal Welfare Act, we have one national strategy for animal welfare, and we have 2 independent committees who advise ministers on animal welfare. One of the committees advises ministers on animal welfare in general, and one of them advises ministers on animal welfare in research, testing and teaching. We work primarily with the Ministry for Primary Industries. They look after both farmed animals and companion animals. But we also talk to local and regional councils. We talk to other government agencies. We talk to industry groups, anyone who's dealing with animal welfare, basically. New Zealand food and fibre exports made up more than 80% of our total exports in the last year or so, contributing about 50 billion to New Zealand's economy. So alongside tourism, the primary sector and farmed animal welfare and for farmed animal products, especially dairy products, is a huge part of our economy. Alongside tourism, primary industries is the biggest industry that we have. So that means that the animal agriculture lobby in New Zealand is hugely influential. So they have a large level of influence with ministers and with government. They have a lot of lobbying power. They have a lot of experience working with government. So when we are talking to government about animal welfare, we are up against quite an influential and experienced animal agriculture lobbying sector. New Zealand is also small, so everyone working in animal welfare knows each other. We know the people working in government, we know the people working in industry. It makes it very important to be able to work together even where we disagree on policy, and it makes it important to be building these relationships as we work on policy. And just a little bit about SPCA New Zealand. So we are New Zealand's largest animal advocacy sort of organisation. There are 5 of us at SPCA who work in the science team and work on policy, engaging with industry and government. As an organisation, we tend to do more behind the scenes policy work than the kind of public campaigning. But we do both when needed. And you can read more about that at the link on the bottom of the slide. Generally speaking, I think probably the most effective campaigns are the ones that you never have to run because you have convinced the decision maker before you have to put public pressure onto them. So this is why this is going to focus a lot more on this direct kind of communication. So now I'll get into some of the kind of specific tips from our time engaging with government. So SPCA always aims to be a credible voice when we're speaking to government. So there's a few ways that we make sure that we do that. Obviously, we want to base our positions on evidence. We want to distinguish opinion from facts. As an advocacy organisation, we may, sometimes talk about values or New Zealand sentiment or public opinion. And when we're sort of straying into talking about this kind of values-based thing, that's fine to do, but just need to distinguish when that's happening from when you're talking from your evidence-based positions. It's important to be consistent for all staff to kind of be saying the same things, to be consistent over time, or where you are changing for that to be based on evidence. Obviously, and we heard from the last presentation, super important to be fully informed. So understanding the, whatever process it is that you're making a submission into or working with government on, understand what that process is, what the legislation is trying to do, engage with as many stakeholders as possible. So identify your allies, of course, but make sure that you understand what your opposition is saying as well, so that you can address their arguments proactively. When there are gaps in evidence or a flaw in an argument, or maybe there's some science missing or something in something you want to say, acknowledge that that's the case rather than just powering through. So I've just got a few examples on this slide from some of the sort of written work that we've done. So firstly, as an organisation, in the top middle there, you can see that we have a set of position statements, and these are available online on the webpage that I linked earlier. These inform all of our sort of submissions, all of our work. So our submissions are based on our position statements. Our media statements are drawn from our position statements. Yeah, all of it comes back to this basically. It means that we are consistent in what we say across all our staff. Of course, SPCA does more than advocacy. We've got compliance staff, we've got frontline staff working with animals directly on the ground. So as long as everybody's referring back to this position statement, we can ensure that we're always coming across with a consistent and evidence-based kind of way. We can ensure that all of those position statements are based on evidence. So behind the scenes, we've got spreadsheets for each position statement, sort of linking to the science papers or linking to the policy that underlie them. And it also means that stakeholders can access these position statements. People that we work with, other people who may be looking to us for what SPCA might say on an issue, they can access these position statements and they can understand where we stand on an issue at any given time. And we review them every 3 years just to make sure that they're up to date. In terms of keeping up to date and some of the things that we use those position statements for, on the bottom left there, you can see a typical kind of public consultation page from the New Zealand government. So this was a public consultation last year for a code of welfare for pigs. Underneath the code of welfare itself, there's a bunch of PDFs. All of them are very detailed, all of them are very long. There's a lot of information in them. And for us, it's really important that we get into that detail, that we read all of those documents, that we understand all of this information that's being presented and what the process is before we make a submission. Because who will be taking the time to do that if we don't, the pork industry will be reading all of those documents and will be understanding them. So it's important that we do that too, so that our submissions can be as useful to the government as possible. Finally, on the bottom right there's just a excerpt from a recent article that I wrote about the removal of velvet antler and deer farming in New Zealand, which is a product that is produced in New Zealand and exported primarily into Asian. So in terms of acknowledging kind of the gaps in our argument or the limitations in our argument, we can address them up front. So we already know that the industry is going to say that there's already regulated use of pain relief and so everything's fine. We can build that into our argument. We can explain why we think that's not good enough rather than ignoring it. So the second tip and the thing that SPCA really focuses on is getting a seat at the table. We sort of say that it's better to have a seat at the table rather than be shouting outside the door. So to do that, we build and maintain relationships. We work with all stakeholders to improve animal welfare. We work with industry, we work with government. We engage in as many opportunities as possible to make submissions. If there's a way to talk about animals, we will find it, and we'll put it in a submission, and we will submit that to the government. One technique to talk to policymakers at the table, and it's one that I see animal use industries use quite a lot, and that I saw them use quite a lot when I was with government, is to use and mirror the language that government itself is using. So identify those important documents that are driving the work that's being done, and use them, right? Quote them back. So one of the things I tend to quote quite often is, things like New Zealand's animal welfare strategy. You can use it to argue that the government has already committed to certain things, and that's why this proposal is needed to continue. Read and quote papers from the ministerial advisory committees and use those. It's even little things like identifying and using the same kinds of acronyms that the government tends to use. We also work to identify all the stakeholders on any given issue, and we try and understand their position and where they're coming from. So there's a few more examples. So on the left is an example from one of our standard kind of submissions templates. So where we kind of really talk up and we list all of the tables that we are already sitting at. We try and show that we're already part of working groups, that we can be trusted, that we have expertise to offer, and that we will work with others to improve welfare. On the right is another paragraph from that same Dear Velvet article, so where we have understood the position of the opposition, which is the deer farming industry. They have claimed that the practice that we're talking about is being done for human or animal safety reasons. We found that out by reading all of the submission documents that were made. and we can build that, into our argument and address that in a way where we can talk about it before they can even rebut that argument. The bottom example is from a submission on rodeo in New Zealand. So a big part of the argument around that rodeo submission was to use documents that had already been put out by the government in the past. So in this case, we're looking at the National Animal Welfare Advisory Committee, which is what NAWAC stands for in that highlighted section. And we picked up what they had already released a few years ago, which was a document describing all of the animal welfare problems with rodeo. And so it was a good opportunity to say, well, what about that document that you put out a few years ago? How have you thought about that? Why are you putting out this new proposal when you've already done some work on this? It's one thing for the government or for this advisory committee to argue with an animal advocacy organisation, but it's another thing to be arguing with yourself. So that's quite a good technique to use. And the final kind of tip that I wanted to talk about, and what SPCA always tries to do, is to try to become the solution and not the problem. And this one is informed especially from my time in government. So this is a generalisation and it's not always true, but a typical scenario when working on any given animal welfare issue might be that you're talking to animal industry on one side and you're talking to animal advocates on the other. And you as a government employee are just trying to get all the information and answer a question for the minister or something like that. As a general rule, the animal use industries, they are experienced with lobbying. They have paid staff to deal with you. They are friendly, they make themselves available, they provide advice, they connect you to experts. The reason that they're doing that is transparently because they're trying to lobby or get some kind of position. But as a government employee, you're kind of in this situation where you just need to get an answer or get some information quickly. Often on the other side, the animal advocates could be critical. They wanted to tell you what was wrong with what you were doing. They wanted to say that you weren't working fast enough, or they're often volunteers. They're hard to get hold of, they're hard to pin down. Sometimes they don't want to share information, or they want to tell you you're wrong and then they don't really explain why. Again, this is kind of a generalization, right? It's not always the case, but that became kind of what some government employees expected when they engaged with the two different sides. So what SPCA tries to do, and I think what is generally a good kind of technique, is to try and be that stakeholder who helps government, who helps policymakers, who helps ministers overcome barriers. So identify what everybody is working towards and try and help them get there. So here's a few examples from some documents that we've put together recently. So on the right there is a letter that we wrote to the Fisheries Minister in the last few months around aquaculture in New Zealand. The government had said in their own documents that they had a goal of creating a resilient and sustainable aquaculture sector. So we told them that they can have that, but in order to get that, they would have to engage with animal welfare advocates, because otherwise it wouldn't make sense. The sector wouldn't be resilient and sustainable. Down the line, they'll find that there is increasing criticism of them. And so in this early stage, when they're trying to figure out where the aquaculture industry is going, we told them that we're willing to work with them. We're here and we want to help you, but we need to have a seat at the table, right? So once we're at the table, we can talk about what that kind of specifically means. But for now, we're just identifying the common goal that we all have here and how we can all work together. On the left is an excerpt from a submission about regulating social media and animal cruelty, which the SMAC Coalition from Asia for Animals really helped with, and their resources that are available online were really good. we were telling the government that there is a bit of work to do to address this area, but we didn't just say that there was work to do and then walk away. We said that we're here to help them. We will give them our expertise and we'll give them our time to make sure that it happens. In both of those examples, we're still waiting for the outcome, but these are, generally speaking, the strategies that SPCA uses when talking to government. And that's all the tips I have. So those are the three main things. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope that was helpful, and happy to chat to anyone in the Asia for Animals Coalition workspace about these.
Thank you so much, Mary. That was a fantastic presentation. Really love the resources and the examples that you shared on what each of the learnings can look like when put into practical use. I think a lot of the members can use these resources and in their everyday work. Thank you so much. Next up, we have Mr. Vinod Kumar, who is the General Manager of Administration of Blue Cross India. Blue Cross India is one of India's largest and oldest animal welfare organization, which runs active animal welfare, rights, and humane education programs. Prior to Blue Cross, Vinod was the Assistant Secretary of the Animal Welfare Board of India, which is a statutory body of Government of India, which established under the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act. So over to you, Vinod.
Yeah, thanks, Pavitra. Is it possible for you to share the presentation?
Yeah, sure. We can have that. Just a moment.
I'm going to talk about three aspects that has happened in the last decade in animal welfare in India. Basically, people in India would have known about a sport called Jallikattu that happens in Tamil Nadu. It's basically a sport where bulls are actually made to go into an arena where people run into this arena and try to tame the bull, and in the process, a lot of bulls get hurt. Many human beings are also killed or injured, previously injured, and it is a real mess, I can tell you. And there have been many attempts to actually bring it under control and even do away with, but it could never happen, in spite of the fact that India had an annual act called the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act, which was enacted in 1960 itself, which made harming animals or treating animals cruelly punishable offense. So, in spite of that, this sport has been, which has been there in the tradition, in the culture for over centuries, has continued to happen. And finally, in the early part of 2000, I think it was in 2007, the case went to the Supreme Court. And for over 7 years, the case was actually argued in court. And finally, in May 2014, the Supreme Court came out with a judgment, which was a landmark judgment. It was a victory completely for the animals. And the Supreme Court banned the sport of Jallikattu. And in the process, they also came out with several directions and declarations in their judgment. And I said that it was a landmark judgment because short of saying that animals have rights just like human beings, they said everything that is required to be said about animal welfare. And you must know that the people in the animal welfare, people in India were a choice lot at that time. And one of the declarations in the judgment was the Supreme Court wanted, the next slide, please. The Supreme Court wanted the government to actually amend the PCA Act, which was enacted in 1960, and which is a little outdated now on account of the low penalties and the fines and all that. And they actually exhorted the Parliament to amend the PCA Act. And that was actually, I think, because the Animal Welfare Board of India, of which I was, where I was working, we were actually engaged with the government to amend the PCI Act for quite some time, and we had actually given a draft of the Animal Welfare Bill in 2010 itself. And after this this judgment came out in May, the AWBI decided to actually modify the Animal Welfare Bill that was actually earlier given. And within a short period of 1 month, we made a new bill and presented to the government, because the process is that the Animal Welfare Board of India will recommend to the government about the changes or the amendments or new bills that have to be brought out. And it is for the government to take it up to the parliament and then pass the bill and make it into an act. So in June of 2014, we gave the next slide, please. We gave the next, we gave the Animal Welfare Bill, the draft Animal Welfare Bill, which took into effect all the points that were made by the Supreme Court and the what I would call the lacuna that was there in the PCI Act, and submitted it there. Unfortunately, though the statute expects the AWBI to make the recommendations, it is entirely up to the government to take it up or not. And it was a big letdown to everybody there in AWBI, as well as the animal welfare community in India, that nothing happened about the movement of the amendment or a new bill to replace the PCI Act. And even the last 9 years have passed since 2009. The situation still remains the same. A minor thing is in November of 2022, close to 1 year back, the AWBI actually circulated the amendment points to the people and asked for their suggestions and objections, if any. And however, the situation still remains the same. The reality is, next point. These were all these were all the points, the declarations and directions that the Supreme Court had actually made in the judgment. And finally, what the thing is, the reality is, unless there is a political will to really change the act or make a difference to the lives of the animals, there is very little that activism or thing. But nobody, I should say that nobody in India has actually forgone or let up the hope that this will happen. Still, we are there have been a lot of campaigns and appeals through change.org and all to make the amendment to the PCI Act come into a reality. Finally, ultimately, the government has to take a call, and we are hoping that something would come out of it as early as possible. Next point. Yeah, this is what I said. And the second thing that I wanted to talk about was in India. The next slide, please. See, the Animal Welfare Board of India is the only statutory body for the welfare of animals in India. And we get, when I was there in AWBI, we used to get close to 60 or 70 emails, mainly about complaints about people being harassed for feeding animals or even having a pet at home. Even though there is no law that actually prohibits people from keeping domestic animals as pets. There have been too many complaints where pet owners have been asked to abandon their pets because they live in an apartment or a flat, and apartment association bylaws do not allow for pets to be kept. And so it became too much of a thing where I used to personally used to send emails to close to 20, 30 people every day, telling about the rules and why they should not, they cannot actually impose these kind of bylaws or rules preventing people from having pets or being compassionate to animals. So finally, the legal subcommittee of the Animal Welfare Board of India decided to come out with a circular laying out all the rules and the laws about what it says about having pets or being compassionate to animals or feeding animals. In India, we have a situation where we do have a lot of animals that live in the streets, dogs, cats, even cattle. And sometimes all of these animals, cannot say that all of them get food all the time. And there have been compassionate people who actually feed animals so that they don't go hungry all the time. And in fact, they have been really useful and helpful in making the animal birth control program become easier. Because when people actually trust, when animals actually trust people, and it makes it easier for us to catch the animals and take them to the pound to the hospital for the animal birth surgeries, and then send them back to the same place where they live. So we decided to come out with a circular. It was a 4-page circular giving out all the parameters as to what people can do and people cannot do, and more importantly, what the resident welfare associations cannot do, because they have been a law unto themselves, making it difficult for those who live in apartments to own pets or to keep pets and even feed animals outside their place or inside the campus. So this circular that was actually that came out in 2014 and then fine-tuned in 2015. It was a real helpful thing, a tool for the animal welfare people and citizens in general who were very compassionate to animals. Because though the PCI Act has been there for close to more than 60 years now, the reality is there are many ignorant law enforcement officials also who, out of their ignorance, used to harass the people who feed animals or even take care of animals. So this circular actually was a godsend to the people, so that they could actually use it to counter those who were inimical to animals or actually trying to harass them, and also deal with the police and the law enforcement officials. So to an extent, I can say that after this circular was issued, the complaints that came to Blue Cross, to Animal Welfare Board of India, reduced almost up to 75%, I can say. And after that, we used to share these circulars whenever any complaints come also, and ask them to take a stand and deal with the people using these guidelines and the rules that have been given in the circular. The third thing is, even after this after this circular was issued in 2015, in February of 2015, I felt that we had to actually bring it to the notice of the next slide, please. This was the circular that I was talking about. The next slide, please. Yeah, this circular was actually issued by Major General Karb, who was the chairman of AWBI then. Next slide. Yeah. See, after this circular was brought out and made available to the public, we felt that there's a need to address the law enforcement officials directly, and I sent this communication from the APPI to the Director General of Police, who are the top police official in the state. And we sent out this communication to all the DGPs in India, and basically informing them about what the animal welfare laws say about keeping animals and all that, and also making them aware that the AWI has issued this circular, and that they should actually address their subordinates in police stations and the districts, and tell them to be receptive to the complaints that are brought before them. Because ultimately in India, what happens is when people go to the law enforcement authorities for complaining about any cruelty matters or even about harassment to them, the general tendency is totally to fought them off or tell them to ignore it, or simply sometimes even in a very condescending manner deal with them. So we wrote to the DGPs of all the states and told them about this particular aspect, and we actually we advised them to send circulars to all the stations and the police personnel to be receptive to complaints, and also be proactive in ensuring that cruelty complaints are actually addressed as is required under the PCI Act and the Supreme Court directions of 2014. And I will say that because of these kind of communications that AWI was able to come out with and disseminate in the public forum, the people in the animal welfare community were able to use these, and to a large extent, they were able to deal with the situation on the ground. While it's not possible for any statutory organization or the government to come to the aid of every individual at the local level or at the ground grassroots level, these kind of communications really help in the people learning about it and trying to deal with the issues at the local level itself, thereby making it easier for them to take care of the animals that they care for. So I would say that as Mary explained in the previous presentation, we need to actually engage with the people who make the laws, who are the stakeholders of enacting the laws constantly, and in fact, if necessary, actually even approach them to conduct sensitization programs to bring about the knowledge about the animal welfare laws and how they can actually make a big contribution to preventing cruelty to animals. These are the things that I have actually experienced in my stint in Animal Welfare Board of India. And after my my joining Blue Cross of India 5 years back, in fact, even though Blue Cross of India is a non-government organization based in Chennai, just like AWBI, Blue Cross of India receives a lot of complaints from individuals or even organizations from all over the country. Probably because of the brand value and the longevity of the organization. So I make use of all these circulars and the knowledge that I have to bring it to the attention of the law enforcement authorities and also the people who send their complaints by email about these activities. So I really hope that they really make a difference to the lives and in a better way, so that cruelties are reduced and And I sincerely hope and pray that the amendment to the PCI Act is actually enacted as soon as possible by the Government of India, so that animals can get more protection from baseless cruelty that is happening all over the country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vinod, both for the presentation and the wonderful work that you've been doing through Blue Cross India and AWPI. I think I've known for Blue Cross's work for a few years now, and even while I was working in government advocacy, I've received a lot of help from Blue Cross in my policy advocacy work. So thank you so much. So we will be moving on to the question and answer section. So I will request all of you, if you haven't posted your questions already, please do so right now. So my first question is to Nina and Teresa, whoever wants to answer. So it's quite well known that policymakers can move a little slowly. So did you find, especially around your work in the pandemic treaty, that you had to quickly bring together your responses, and because policy bodies were acting more quickly than usual in the wake of the pandemic? Or was there still sufficient time for you to pull together the scientific responses? Are there any methods that you used or resources which can help advocates act more quickly to capitalize on influence in light of the big events as they arise?
Thank you very much for this question. Yes, indeed, we have to respond quickly because one challenge, these processes are frequently changing, especially in Geneva. So we had now, for example, the case that they decided to do a very important meeting just in 1 or 2 weeks. So that means that we need to be prepared as good as possible. We have our frame, let's say, so we have our position and key documents we can use again and again for different purposes, and then adapt it to the specific audience. So depending on whether it's a certain member state or whether it's all the member states or whether it's an international institution, we can adapt these messages and can work with this frame. But yes, we very often have the situation that we need to put together policy briefs or very quick statements within a few days. And it always takes some time to get the internal approval. So we try to work ahead as good as possible, be prepared as good as we can, but still a lot of flexibility is needed, yes. Thanks for the question.
Thank you so much, Teresa. That makes a lot of sense. And I think, one second. Yeah, I think it's very practical to have your resources ready in the wake of such big events. My next question is to Mary. Do you find in your advocacy that policymakers in your country are more likely to endorse or be amenable to influence by scientific publications that are coming from your own country? Or are they skeptical when it comes to research from other parts of the world that they are less familiar with?
Yes, I think in general they are more skeptical of information from other parts of the world. And I think that often comes from the fact that industry, for example, will say, oh, you can't apply that here. we're different, we have a different system, that kind of thing. It depends a lot on the kind of, I guess it depends on the specific topic that you're working with. Sometimes you can get past it, with some kinds of issues. If you're talking about meat chickens or something, you could make an argument that it doesn't matter where in the world, it's all farmed pretty similarly. But in some things like the type of dairy farming we do in New Zealand, it's very unique, and it's quite a lot harder to try and use scientific resources from other countries. So that can be a barrier. One thing that SPCA is lucky to be able to do is that we have a science team from within SPCA, so we can gather this kind of evidence and make these arguments. We also sometimes partner with universities or other organisations and even co-author papers. So if there is no scientific evidence that's relevant to New Zealand, we have been part of authoring, writing papers to be able to have that evidence in New Zealand. So if it's possible, that can always be something that can be looked into as well.
Thank you so much. I think that also answers my next question around how to overcome gaps in evidence, because resources can very often be scattered, especially when working in a region like Asia, which is so diverse, and there's also like a lot of gaps in information and resources at present.
Yeah,
So,
and there was also a tip from another speaker as well, to try and team up with experts in other areas. So that's something that we sometimes do. If there's a gap in terms of, some kind of legal argument, then maybe we could reach out to an organisation in New Zealand that deals specifically with animal welfare law, and we can kind of fill gaps this way. But yes, it can be an issue, and when that is the case, sometimes it's also useful to again go back to those first kind of principles, to look at the policy documents that the government itself is working with, and try and quote some of those things to try and find a way forward.
Thank you so much, Mary. My next question is to Vinod. So also, like, from my own experience of working with the Indian government, what would be your tips for young advocates on what they can expect from the initial stages of government engagement? Do you have any thoughts on how to overcome resistance or their lack of commitment when it comes to advocacy issues?
Yeah, see, the most important thing is to have good knowledge about the subject, because if you are going to engage with the people who make the decisions in the government, it makes sense to know about the subject that you are engaged in. So to some extent, the advocacy has to understand that at the larger picture, the government has to take into account the aspects of every aspect that is prevalent in the country. We can't expect the government to completely forget about everything else and only deal with the animal welfare aspect also, because at some point you need to know that it's not going to happen always. So if you have realistic expectations and even what you can get from them, there is a better chance of that happening, because by and large, at least what I have seen being inside the government as well as coming outside is, to a large extent, the concessions that are given to government, the concessions that are given to government to animal welfare sometimes come very grudgingly. So if you expect the moon to happen, sometimes it will not. So have a good knowledge about the subject, and then reasonable expectations, and then keep pegging it, because unless you keep go behind them and then make them understand the reality or what is required to be done, sometimes it will never happen. Just like what I mentioned about the animal welfare bill that has been hanging over the thing for close to 10 years now. You have to keep on trying your best to make them engage and not forget about that at all. So that's very important, and it makes sense to have a coalition of organizations, just like in India, we have the FIAPO, which is a coalition of over 100 organizations. And that really makes a difference because they can have a better voice than an individual or individual organization. So these are my points.
Thank you so much, Vinod. This was very helpful. Just being conscious of the time, I'm going to close with one last question to Nina or Teresa. What, according to you, can be some ways that we can ensure participation of organizations from grassroots, regional or international levels in the negotiation of the pandemic treaty?
I will take this one again. Thank you. So in the official process, there is the chance for organizations to become Annex E stakeholders. So that means that any organization, civil society organization, NGO, can get in touch with their respective government, with their in their country, to ask them to be suggested as an Annex E stakeholder in the next negotiations. The next IMB is, I think, in December, if I'm correct now. So you can get in touch with your contacts in government, provide them with a quick summary about your work and why it could be relevant for the pandemic treaty. And they can send this to the IMB, and they will then decide whether you will be approved or not. But normally, everyone is approved.
Thank you, Teresa. So that's all the time that we have for today. We have made a note of all the questions that we've received from the audience and some of our own questions that we might reach out to you with, and it'll be great if you can maybe respond to those via email or something, and then we can share it with our network. So thank you all so much for joining. Thank you to all the speakers for the wonderful presentations. And now I'm going to pass it over to Naukan.
Thank you, everybody, for the wonderful first sessions. Now we'll have a 3 minutes break, and we'll resume with the second sessions after this. Welcome back, everyone. Before we start, let me begin by introducing the moderator for the second sessions on incorporating science into policy advocacy in Asia, how to find a common ground. Brooke Aldrich is the lead coordinator of the Asia for Animals Macaque Coalitions, and Brooke has studied, worked with, and worked on behalf of primates for many years. She's also the Asia for Animals Coalition Deputy Coordinator, a member of the IUCN SSC PSG section for human-primate interactions, and has served as director and trustee for UK-based charity Neotropical Primate Conservation since its founding in 2007. Brooke is particularly interested in how human perceptions and exploitations of non-human primates affect primate welfare and conservations, and in the intersections between welfare and conservations. Over to you, Brooke.
Hi there, can you see me?
Yes, very well.
Yes, okay, good. So welcome everybody to the second part of today's event. As Nokan said, it's called Incorporating Science and Policy into Policy Advocacy in Asia, How to Find the Common Ground. So we have three really interesting and experienced speakers for this session. They're going to talk to you about the importance of your evidence base, how you present it in policy advocacy. Factually accurate information is incredibly important, but how do you go about ensuring that you have the best possible evidence and vitally presenting it in a way that will be effective for your specific advocacy efforts? First, we welcome Dr. Chatterjee, who is the Director of Research and Policy at SAMAYU, one of the AFA Coalition's core member organizations. We will next have a presentation that was pre-recorded by Amelia Lin, Director of Global Policy at Mercy for Animals, who sadly couldn't be with us in person today. And finally, Ruli Prayoga, who is Mercy for Animals Country Director for Indonesia, will finish out the session. We'll have a question and answer session after Ruli has finished presenting. And so now we will go on to our first speaker. Dr. Chatterjee, a zoologist, entomologist, and esteemed researcher, has been working with SAMAYU on research and policy-related endeavors since 2022. This work aims to ensure the holistic well-being of animals, the people, and the planet. Today, Dr. Chatterjee will discuss the needed shift in policy work from mere data presentation to collaborative, informed advocacy. Dr. Chatterjee, welcome. You can begin.
Thank you, Brooke. So my presentation will be shared by AFA, or I have to share my screen if you can kindly guide. Hello, am I audible?
Yes, Dr. Chatterjee.
Yeah.
You would like to for assistant to share the slides?
Yeah, that would be better.
Just a moment. Thank you.
Thank you.
So while we're waiting for this, just a reminder that you can enter your questions into the chat box and we will address questions at the end of the session in a question and answer. Comments are also welcome.
So very good afternoon. I'm Dr. Devajyoti Chatterjee, working as Director of Research and Policy at Samayu. So in this today's APA policy webinar, we are talking about integrating science and policy in Asia, the need for informed advocacy. It's a very interesting topic, and we have renowned speakers with us. My talk will just set the stage for this discussion, as I'm a bit new in this policy space. So I'll just share my ideas and views, and eventually we'll have a good discussion with our other two speakers and in this forum. So with this small introduction, let me advance to the slide. Next, please. In Samayu, we are dedicated to ensure the well-being of animals, people, and the planet. We are a movement of people and organizations who care about interconnectedness, animal, people, and our planet, working together to create a just, fair world. Actually, the genesis of our organization was to basic that we realized that the advocacy, that is animal space, needs proper evidence-based advocacy, and this really can leverage the correct coordination between the scientific finding and its final application in a correct way of getting the policy goals achieved. So next, please. Yeah, we connect these interconnected dots of creating a holistic platform wherein the intersectional movement is built to achieve the policy goal using research information. Like the final goal is to set a stage with proper information, their interpretation, and using it in policy framing. Our flagship endeavor, One Health, in that what we use, that we coordinate with different stakeholders. We communicate with the government, academia, then research, farmers, and we identify the problem. We work on that from the research and policy perspective. We transcribe the research findings into a correct policy leveraging, and finally we take it up to the government for policy reform. Next, please. In today's topic, that is incorporation of science in policy protection, how that can happen. If we see the general trend, common trend, that is science supplies the correct evidence that supports the policy movement, and the strategic information, strategic use of those information lead to impactful policy advocacy. That is, the strategy of information generated by meticulous scientific research would well associate an effective policy advocacy program. Next, please. Now, there's an ongoing debate that a scientist, how good a scientist can be in policy advocacy. So, where are the concerns? Basic concerns, if we look at here in this ecosystem, we see that science, the isolated nature of science sometimes makes it a challenge for non-scientific stakeholders to fully grasp the implications of the research. That correct interpretation that should come from a scientific endeavor and eventually will be used as a correct evidence to progress the policy movement is a key topic here. So next, please. If you see the requirement of research in effective policy and how to establish the correct coordination, we will have to go through certain facts. That is, the scientific evidence holds undeniable value in policy discussion because we need to present the evidence properly in support of our policy advocacy. But here needs a paradigm shift in scientific perspective. So the scientific data from mere presentation of the facts, it should be informed advocacy, which the presentation of scientific facts should ensure correct interpretation, which eventually will help in policy disclosure, and the evidencing the facts should correctly align with that policy disclosure. So how will it happen? Just we have seen that science is acting in its own space, and the policy is active in separate dams. So here we need that intersectional collaboration to be established between the stakeholders, which is the paramount approach in this entire endeavor. So when we set that platform, when we bring these stakeholders in one stage to act under one goal, then it will be possible. So next, please. This empirical evidences underscore the potential of this synergy between science and policy. One example from a case study concerning environmental policy advocacy in a developed nation, means from America Northern Pacific region. There, the study was conducted in how the scientific, strength of science and scientific contribution is being viewed and accepted by the public, the interest groups for a policy advocacy conversion based on various research and analysis. They presented the data, and the inference clearly shows that the public and interest groups have heightened expectation from scientific contribution in policy advocacy and acknowledge their potential in informing critical decisions. And such kind of perspectives can really serve a model for Asia, where when emphasizing indispensability of science in robust policy advocacy. Next. So what are the way forwards to make a perfect coordination here? From first of all, there will be effective partnership should be built between the intersectional stakeholders like science and policy. Then a strategic leveraging of scientific data should be done in case of policy work. And a strong leadership from scientific end combined with the data-driven explanation should be an indispensable matter, where we can really find that science could play a pivotal role in policy advocacy. But here in this system, there should be some mandatory vigilance. Like the policymakers must be receptive to scientific insight without overstepping boundaries. And in science, the scientists must remain objective, ensure their credibility isn't compromised by the personal bias. Next, please. So what we recommend that in Asia, the fusion of science and advocacy through informed collaboration is not just essential, but it will strengthen the policy framework. Next, please. Now, I will present an example of how Samayu at our organization, we are really making a perfect nexus of research and effective policy progression through our endeavors. Next, please. In Samayu, we have a specific vertical of research and policy. Our research endeavors that we have so far done since our starting of journey, we have published white papers, we have prepared landscape reports in food system in India. Ongoing field research we have already conducted in 2 states that of India, that is in Andhra Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh, in animal farming with special emphasis in aquaculture and poultry sectors. We have organized an intersectional training and capacity building on One Health in the poultry sector of Andhra Pradesh, wherein 100+ participants from different sectors we could put together, and the participants were from government, from academia, local universities, doctors, farmers, media, students, and all. And there we made that consensus over certain key issues which are very much required for immediate policy intervention. Next, please. Yeah, and through our other works also, we have done the leadership convening in 2022, a series of convenings we have done in aquaculture and One Health. Next, please. Again, these efforts continued in different other sectors like economic and climate resilience, diversification of farming, and outreach of policy making and consumers. Next, please. Samayu has a good partnership ecosystem wherein we are connected with 200+ NGOs, grassroots organizations, and 40+ joined our convening. We have already more than 32 ongoing signed partners, community of grassroots leaders, government functionaries, environmentalists, health practitioners, philanthropists, researchers, students, and more. So we build a complete intersectional platform wherein we conduct our research with the help of relevant stakeholders. Then we bring our results in a common dais. Next, please. Yeah, these are some photographs wherein we conducted some on-ground research works, and we reached out to the grassroots level stakeholders to understand the issues and to address the concerns. Next, please. So far, what you have seen that how the way we conducted our research and the way we have conducted the intersectional platform to address the policy framing issues. Now, with this intersectional research and building a common platform, we represent our scientific findings through intersectional collaboration in an effective policy reform to the government. From our latest One Health training and capacity building program in Andhra Pradesh, we really have made a consensus against the AMR issues, and we have submitted a joint representation to the concerned state government for checking the non-clinical, for resisting against the non-clinical use of antibiotics in animal agriculture sector, especially emphasizing the aquaculture and poultry. Next, please. So that was all what I wanted to share in this forum as a common, from a common perspective of how research and policy can be can coact in a single platform. So with this, I thank AFA for giving me this chance, and now the talk is open for question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chatterjee. That was really interesting, and it's very important work that you're doing. We have a few questions already for you, and I just like to remind the audience that if you have any more, you're welcome to please put them in the chat box, and we'll address them afterwards, after the presentations have been done. So now we will hear from Amelia Lin, who is a specialist in climate and agriculture policy. She's worked at the international level for many years, and today she will speak to us about the scientific perspective within international policy advocacy. This talk is pre-recorded, so we won't have a Q&A for this particular one. So please go ahead and begin the presentation. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Amelia Lin, Director of Global Policy at Mercy for Animals. Thank you to Asia for Animals for inviting me to join today's clinic on incorporating science into policy advocacy. As my own work centers on international policy, my presentation today focuses on advocacy within international policy processes. My colleague Ruli will be presenting next to provide an additional perspective on policy advocacy in Asia. I first wanted to provide a little bit of background on my organization, Mercy for Animals. We're an international nonprofit organization working to end industrial animal agriculture by constructing a just and sustainable food system. Operating in Brazil, India, Mexico, the United States, and Southeast Asia, we envision a world where animals are respected, protected, and free. Founded in 1999, Mercy for Animals has utilized legal advocacy, corporate campaigns, investigations, and public engagement to bring about meaningful change for animals. We believe that engaging in international policy advocacy can be a critical pathway to advancing progress at national, regional, and international levels. Last year, Mercy for Animals launched its Global Policy Program to undertake this advocacy. We first conducted a comprehensive landscape analysis of global policy opportunities that could accelerate the transition from industrial animal agriculture towards a plant-based food system. Utilizing the findings from our landscape analysis, earlier this year, we developed a global policy strategy in consultation with our team members across different programs and regions. In this process, we identified 5 crucial pillars for our global policy program that we think will help us to meet our organizational goals to decrease the number of animals in the food system and to reduce suffering for animals that remain trapped in the current food system. In the context of today's discussion, I wanted to focus on Pillar 2, elevating interlinkages and strengthening research. Within the global policy arena, we know that the suffering of individual farmed animals is not yet a prioritized issue, and the importance of animal welfare and the problems of industrial animal agriculture are historically overlooked. For example, despite the significant and numerous connections between animal welfare and sustainable development, animal welfare is not explicitly considered within any of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. This omission was highlighted in the 2019 Global Sustainable Development Report, which noted animal welfare as a key issue missing from the goals. In order to gain support for farmed animal issues in the near term, we're working to establish the salience of our issues in connection to current international priorities, such as food security, pandemic risk, and climate change. By educating policymakers and the public on the interlinkages between their own priorities and animal issues, we can be more effective in mobilizing support for our issues. As international policy processes and individual governments often emphasize the importance of science-based decision-making, we're working with our own research team as well as with external research partners to utilize the latest scientific evidence to demonstrate these interlinkages. Over the past year and a half, Mercy for Animals has engaged across 3 primary international policy processes, and in each, we have worked to incorporate scientific evidence to support our advocacy. In 2022, we worked alongside coalition partners towards the adoption of a landmark resolution on the nexus of animal welfare, the environment, and sustainable development within the UN Environment Assembly. We then participated at the annual UN Climate Summit last year in Egypt, COP27, engaging global policymakers and stakeholders to raise the profile of animal agriculture's contribution to climate change and to demonstrate the critical importance of considering food systems throughout the international climate agenda. Finally, we have also been engaged in the UN Sustainable Development Mechanism, given the many interlinkages between animal agriculture and sustainable development. In July this year, we were joined by coalition partners, including Asia for Animals, at the high-level political forum on sustainable development in New York. In our advocacy under these UN processes, we try to support our policy proposals by citing high-level UN reports whenever possible. For example, in our climate advocacy, we frequently reference the latest IPCC report, as well as reports like the UNEP Emissions Gap Report. Reports like these compile and analyze the latest scientific science from around the world and have strong credibility among UN bodies and member states. In addition, we utilize peer-reviewed scientific reports to support our advocacy. Landmark reports like the 2019 Eat Lancet Commission's report on healthy diets and sustainable food systems provide opportunities to raise awareness of food systems and animal agriculture issues across governments, scientists, and the public at large, which can in turn provide greater opportunities and momentum to address these issues within policy processes. However, there is a real need to identify and understand research gaps. We recognize that by focusing on peer-reviewed science, we may be limiting our own perspective to the regions and topics most often studied by researchers. Because of this, there have been increasing calls for UN processes and reports to better reflect Indigenous, local, and traditional knowledge systems, and for member states to support and strengthen regional research capacity and research inclusivity. In our area of advocacy on animal welfare and industrial animal agriculture, we're also working with researchers to understand specific research gaps relevant to our work and to commission or stimulate new research in those areas. I've included here a few resources that we frequently reference, and I'll be sure to include links to these reports in my slides. I wanted to take a few minutes to go through two examples of different policy processes where we are currently utilizing scientific evidence to support our work. The first is under the UN climate process. And here, one of our primary areas of work this year is on the global stocktake. And it's expected to be the key political outcome from COP28 later this year. The global stocktake is mandated under the Paris Agreement to assess progress towards the goals of the Paris Agreement and to inform the next round of countries' nationally determined contributions, or NDCs. And the global stocktake specifically calls for consideration of the best available science. Our advocacy goal is for food systems transformation to be included in the global stocktake political outcome, with guidance for countries to include food systems, both production and consumption, in their next NDC. I wanted to give an overview of the full global stocktake process. This is an infographic from the UN climate process showing the 2-year global stocktake process split into the technical phase and the political phase. As of June this year, we've completed the technical phase, which took place across 3 technical dialogues and provided opportunities for parties and civil society to make written submissions. The technical phase has included presentations and inputs from scientists and experts in different fields, and given the timing of the recent IPCC reports, the technical phase has particularly emphasized IPCC findings. As the third and final technical dialogue took place this summer in Bonn, Germany, we worked with coalitions to raise science-based arguments related to animal agriculture and the benefits of shifting towards plant-based diets. And we specifically tried to tie our arguments to the recent IPCC report. We were excited to see some of our messages reflected in the summary report from the session, which just came out a few weeks ago. We're now continuing our advocacy in the lead up to COP28 to reach out to parties raising their awareness of including food systems within the global stocktake political outcome at COP28. We're right now working on a submission which will go in on September 15th. And we're welcoming feedback and additional partners if you're interested in joining this work. So please reach out to me if you're interested in the global stocktake. Finally, the second and last example I wanted to share is the UN Environment Assembly Nexus resolution. The resolution was adopted in March of 2022 and includes a call for the UN Environment Program to produce a report on the relationship between animal welfare, sustainable development, and the environment. The report will then be shared with member states for peer review and presented at the next UN Environment Assembly. The development of the Nexus report offers an important opportunity to deepen our understanding of connections between these issues at a global level and could support the inclusion of animal welfare in future international policy instruments. The resolution was originally sponsored by 7 member states and supported by a coalition of civil society organizations, including the Africa Network for Animal Welfare and the World Federation for Animals. Since its adoption, we have been working alongside coalition partners to compile scientific evidence and resources that demonstrate the multiple dimensions of this animal welfare nexus. Earlier this year, our coalition published an initial compilation of this evidence in our Unveiling the Nexus publication. The publication aims to support the development of the Nexus report and to provide a starting point to explore why animal welfare is essential for both the environment and development communities. I'll also be sure to provide a link to this report and would encourage you to use the Unveiling the Nexus publication when you're looking for references, particularly at an international level. In the back of the publication, it has several pages of key references categorized by topics like biodiversity, health, and food security, so it could be a good resource to use. So now in the process,
Okay, we seem to have a slight technical glitch. Hold on just a moment. We'll try to sort out whatever's happening. We believe it's probably frozen for everyone here.
Before the conclusion of Amelia Lynn's presentations, I read in the comments that the audio was frozen at some point. But please rest assured that we will post the recording of today's sessions on YouTube, as well as the presentation of Amelia's will be available in the PowerPoint's form in the chat box in a moment. Brooke, with that, I think that we should probably move to Ruli's presentations.
Okay, perfect. Give me just a moment to sort all my things out. Sorry about that. We'll as Nokan said, we'll make those slides available later on. But now we have Ruli Prayoga here live today. He is an animal advocate and behavior change specialist who has worked with multiple organizations on climate change, poverty, and the illegal wildlife trade. And today, he's going to talk about science in Asian policy advocacy. Ruli believes in positive change and that the end of factory farming will be a key in achieving a sustainable Earth. So please go on ahead, Ruli. Thank you.
Thank you, Brooke. Thank you for having me in this forum. It's really exciting. So should I share my screen now?
Yes, please go ahead.
Sure. Got it?
Yes, everything is visible. Thank you.
Okay, am I audible? Well, okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. So, just following up my colleague Amelia presentations. Unfortunately, we have a technical glitch on that, but I'm trying to bring those discourse into the local realities. I mean, what is the real happen in Asia, and what we should do about that and how we can make our policy and advocacy works being effective. So I'm share my experience working on the social on the advocacy and policy in the regions a while ago. So I mean also I'm refer back to our earlier presenters that the most of now ecological policies is really political contentious, and it's really there's a clear intersections of science and policy and to addressing pressing challenge like climate change, sustainable development, and public health. And I think through Asia, we experiencing really diverse countries, and then this is really interesting because also there's some questions in early presentation in how we can apply those in some diverse countries like in Asia, and how to effectively integrate scientific research into policy decision making. But let's go back to the reality. I mean, the gaps, among between science based and common policy development. So all the science-based is primarily informed by rigorous scientific research data, and the policy recommendations are grounded in empirical finding. But on the common policy, it's all the decision-making process is influenced by political considerations, public opinions, historical practices, rather than relying on the scientific evidence itself. That's the reality, and the science-based policy is really talking about the long term, and then the common policy is really in the short term and considering potential long-term implication. What I mean here that in reality, in the right now, in the current situations, that most of the policies or regulations is being developed by these common policies, and we have to really clever strategically how we can change these situations and bring the science-based policies into the considerations for the decision-making process. And we have to really acknowledge these differences to make our strategies is more on being effective. My colleague Emilia talking about the NDC or nationally determined contribution is a part of the science-based policies drive, and yes, it is. And NDC cover most sectors: energy, forest, waste, and agriculture, and the country who should meet this commitment, it should be based on science, their science, and this NDCs will reflecting the plan for the national policies implications. So the nationally determined contribution is the example of the science-based policy development. But I took example from my countries, my own countries. But in the case study here, when we trying to bring bridging local and commitment into the local realities, that even the Indonesians have submit the NDC and showing some commitment to act climate change. But unfortunately, in the national policies, it doesn't support the statement itself. So when talking about the reductions of the carbon, for example, we we keep on using coals, and the coals mining is extended. So it's really this is the reality of how the science-based policies stand into the reality. That's why we have to really clear to see about this, and to really pick up our own battleground. What is the most doable policy and advocacy work in the regions or in our country itself, because this is the reality itself there. So what we need here, I refer to the previous also presenters, that we need a holistic approach that's it's really can be most of the efficient and effective approach for this science-based policy. And I have learning that using for example, the One Health approach on the farm animal welfare issue, and bring the antimicrobial resistance issues as the key advocacy in country, it's get more effective and efficient to break down the conventional policy itself, and then starting towards using the science-based policy for their policy development. So that's one of the approach. And again, they already talking about the gaps again. In many ASEAN countries, we have limited data of consumption patterns, agricultural practice, and also animal welfare standards. And there's also inconsistent policies, and I think this is really obvious, this lack of enforcement. Even the policy is there, but somehow the enforcement can be weak. Yeah. Then the cultural influence, the cultural practices among the countries in Asia also we have differences. Especially on the food. So that's also can be really gaps and barrier to have these interventions. And and also the climate change integrations, the intersections of the climate change and food system in the region is not always fully integrated into the advocacy efforts. Means that there's some groups talking about only climate change, only energy, and then some group is talking about food system. So they're still working in silos. Then we have to thinking about how we can build more robust and effective advocacy works on this. And where is the strategic momentum a key moment in the region to do the advocacy and policy work, science-based one? We have, like, just in Indonesia, we're happening now, and then just ended today, I think, or yesterday. We have an ASEAN summit. So we have an ASEAN. Yes, ASEAN is one of the options in region to have to influence the regional agenda. So because in ASEAN we can have like a commitment and declarations, particularly on the climate change, and then I think and trade, and also sustainable development goals. So I think one of the arena can be used is the ASEAN. And the constraint of this ASEAN, that again, we have different cultural and dietary diversity, and commitment and declarations somehow is not also being implemented in the real life situations. And smallholder farming, many Asian countries have a significant number of smallholder farming. So the advocacy should address the unique challenge and opportunity of this farm towards our acts and improving animal welfare. And transboundary issues, we have a challenge on this among the countries. So we have to see this is the constraint to using ASEAN as our venue. Then what we can do to make our advocacy and policy work and more effectively, that first, that we have to build credibility. Peer-reviewed scientific research is also somehow is needed to gain the trust of policymakers and the public itself. And working together, between scientists and science advocates, and to engage with the media outlets, because this is really, really important to build a really strong relationship with the journalists, to encourage the science itself to the public, and especially on the policy recommendations. Strong coalitions building. This is also really pivotal and important to have a collaborations among stakeholders, and including NGOs, government, and influence science-based advocacy work. And then maintaining activity in diverse venue means that we can not only influence the policymakers, but we have also to mobilize scientists and to educate broad and diverse audience. And the last one, to be prepared for the public to recognize and fight against scientific misinformation. This is also really important, because in their side, in the opposite side, they also somehow using the science as their basic premise. I think that's from me. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Ruli. The floor is yours, Brooke.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, sure. I was just having a bit of microphone problem. That's really interesting. Thank you so much. And thanks for starting a little bit early too, unexpectedly. So from listening to the talks today, it doesn't always seem like science and advocacy are always working hand in hand, but they really are sort of natural partners. I know that in the world of primatology, there seems to be a growing appetite for advocacy, and it seems as though this is the case in other realms too. And so on that, we have several questions for each of you, and I'd like to start with this one for Dr. Chatterjee, and I'll read it out to you as it was written. It says, it is typical, even expected, to encounter resistance to animal welfare concepts from policymakers. But do you find any resistance from scientists? After all, a good scientist makes his study without any preconceived notions or agendas. Or do you find that scientists can generally or overwhelmingly see the obvious need for animal welfare advancements? I'd like to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, actually, in my opinion, when a scientist addresses an issue, so that should be completely unbiased, and there should be no preconceived notion that we must say that, okay, if we are addressing animal welfare issue in our science, so we must overlook all such things which may in a way hinder our view to give the holistic attention from the scientific perspective. We should frame the objective according to the concern, according to the need or the gap, to address the gap. For science, what I understand, that first we need to understand the gap. Then you frame the research accordingly, frame your objectives, frame your research questions. Accordingly, you craft the methodology, and you present your data, you collect your data, analyze it, and present it to justify the objective, whether it is scientifically correct or there are some other interpretation. So, especially in our case, in Samayu, what we do, we first identify the concerns in sector, connecting to the people. Then from there, we identify the gap and we go ahead with the research framing. So that the data, when it comes and data interpretation, that can be completely, first of all, focused, and secondly, unbiased, that we are not taking in consideration any other fact which can influence our interpretation. So my response in this space would be a kind of generalistic, I know, but this should be a procedure, in my opinion.
Thank you very much. And I'd also like to ask, really, what do you think about this? What is your take on the issue?
Again, what I already presenting, that there's differences between the science-based and then common policies, and most of the politicians they ignore anything about science. Actually, they are fall up into the common policies. Why? Because they say that policy for them, in their mind, I mean, most of it, they always they talking about the only short-term benefit. What benefit? What is in it for me? Animal welfare, even not part of my my concern, because it's only having a short benefit for my party or for me. The thing that we have to do is to start to explain, convince them that this will be affecting your life. This will be affecting your family. This is affecting with your food. That's why when you delivering this message to these politicians, somehow we cannot directly say, with us directly. If you come to them as perhaps said, like I'm like an animal protest or animal advocate persons, and then I speak to them, they won't listen to you. They will be. But that's why I say that we have to collaborate with journalists, with media. So channeling our message through them, and then that's how we can trying to make this really important. This is the important stuff for you. This will be affecting your lives.
Okay.
That's where we start to thinking. Okay, what's next? Okay, we have to starting our advocacy work.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the next question is for you, really, to start with, and it kind of follows on from where you are there. It's about platforms for grassroots and international groups to discuss policy issues and to discuss evidence. So in what ways do you imagine a regional coalition like Asia for Animals can do to facilitate this kind of dialogue? That's what we're here for, and we want to make it work.
Yes, I think regional platform it's really important here, because somehow the politicians in countries, they tend to get more. I'm not sure with other countries, but in Indonesia, for example, they will be more trust, having trust with the research from the from the West or from outside. Yeah, that's one thing. Second thing is we have to really strategically choose our battleground. Means that where we should work with. Is it ASEAN? Is it APEC? Is it that's the something that people gathering in one place and then make a commitment that's something that I mean, APA can work. It's really to influence those economic venue, not political venue, economics, like APEX, G20, G7. That's the most, I mean, that's most influential. Even in my belief, you know, somehow like the climate change COP. I mean, I've been in most 15 COPs, you know, but for the same thing, you know, just conversations, you know. So because the decisions in COP is already being decided in G7. So that's how we have to really strategically choosing our battleground, where we should put our resources in, rather than we just randomly jump in. So the regional event key momentum is really important, and we have to capitalize that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Chatterjee, Samayu being working with lots of other organizations, how can you see AFA sort of helping out with such collaborations as that?
Yeah, that's a very good topic you initiated. So what earlier also I shared my view that if AFA can create a platform wherein we can have this international bilateral discussions and talks between the organizations of countries, wherein we have some common areas to focus. So that would be a good platform. Like in Asia, mostly in Southern and Southeast Asia, we have many common issues in animal agriculture, like AMR, animal welfare, and all such things which now require prime attention. So if AFA can create such bilateral platforms between the organizations, wherein we have some common grounds to think, common grounds to act together, so that would be a good approach here. And that would really help this coalition to build an intersectional platform to address such issues. And eventually these things can be taken to the international forum and for a greater impact. That's my take here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you again. Changing gears just a little bit. This question is really for both of you, and I'll just let you decide who answers first. It's a simple question with probably not a very simple answer, and it is, how do you build and maintain good relationships with scientists and with policymakers? Would one of you like to tackle that?
I would request Professor to please present his findings here, then I'll write. So please.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Chatterjee. Yeah, how we can maintain our relationship with both scientists and politicians. I think one thing that we can do is to have what's called a venue, you know, a place to meet. Means that it can be a media, you know, it can be a caucus, or even it's a event, you know, some event, discussions event or something like that. Yeah, or what I want to say that to maintain the scientists, we have to really bring up what those scientists say, you know, to be useful. I mean, to be impacted, you know. And we can be a mediocre, you know, on that, and we can work with the media, with the journalists, you know, to have this kind of I couldn't say this platform, but it's like the place, yeah, the venue or the hub. Yeah, we can build a hub for them to talk. Yeah, I've been experiencing once in Indonesia while I'm advocating the revisions of the conservation law number 5 in Indonesia. It took ages, you know. It's a bit 20 years. It's still 1995, you know. That this conservation law. And what can I do, because there's a different point of view between the scientists and then the politicians. So I developed a newsletter, a newsletter, and this newsletter is being managed. I mean, I'm as a media core at that time, so I work in the one project, to doing that. So I'm asking scientists to have like a discussions, and we put the discussion in this newsletter, and same thing with the politicians, to give overview. And then this magazine, this newsletter is being distributed to both the universities and to the House of Representatives and the government itself, so people can really read the both ways. And they being, so the things here that we have to create that they being acknowledged. That's one key on how we can build maintain a relationship with them, build a confidence, build they feel that they're being acknowledged. I think just from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Chatterjee, excuse me, I'd like to hear what you have to say about that. And then we have a question from Jackson from 4Paws.
Thank you. Just I resonate with what Ruli sir presented just now. But we have to make that ice between these two sectors. We have to connect them in a common platform. And this is what Samayu is doing through our endeavor, that we are reaching out to them individually, initially in individual capacity. Then we are identifying that common points where we can bring them in one platform and where they can support each other, the policymakers and scientists. So how the research findings from university, from academia can really support the science, the policy making and government. And this acceptance in either side means that contribution from science to policy from the scientists' end, and the acceptance of that scientific contribution for incorporation in policy framing by the policy makers. That coordination that have to be done by the organizations like us. So this could be a good way we can bridge this gap and make these two inseparable functions of effective policy advocacy performing in well with complete efficiency. That is, the scientific findings can really be used in effective policy advocacy. So this is what's my take here. Thank you.
Thank you once again. Thank you. This question isn't asked of either one of you in particular, and I think either or both of you could answer it. And if our previous speakers are still here, I think we could also invite them in to potentially answer if they've got something to say. So the question is, with these Asian examples, knowing that the Asia Pacific region is one of 5 or 6 regions, how can we leverage our support for national work to have impacts at the regional and international level? So alignment with coalitions and other regions. So since each country and region have different priorities, and even when we have similar priorities, globally, we aren't able to align effectively as with COVID-19 efforts, for example. So that question is really open to whoever wants to start. And again, I would like to hear from more than, from at least 2 of you, possibly more.
Sure,
Anybody?
I can start. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is really interesting. I mean, I've been working in region is most a bit more than 8 years, and always this is only my personal experience. We always thinking that how we can build our national work to have impacts at the regional level. We always thinking like that, But in my experience, you can't. You know, even you are you hold I mean you hold the presidency. You know, for example, Indonesians G20, now ASEAN. You know, how impacted the regional level of work without really clear on when and where we should have an intervention. So I think what we can do here, yes, we know that every nation has every country has their own priority, but when they comes into event, when comes into the like what's called the associations like ASEAN, you know, like a APEC, like a G20, like a G7, they bring their own similar interests into this event. You know, for example, like a APEC is a economic Asia Pacific economics. That means that all the countries who has interest in the economics will be there, and that's the key moment for us to bring some impacts, you know, to get the impacts. G20 in India, yeah, I think this month. What we can do, what AFA can do, you know, what we can have like a intersection, side event, you know, in what's called the C20 forum, the CSOs forum. You know, we can do that. Bring media. Our intentions is to create a media gigs, you know, competitions media, that hey, this is something that we can our call, you know, instead of these politicians talking, we and our scientists is also talking, you know. You know, it's like that, you know. Thing is that in the reality, this is only my personal experience. The reality is that when you try to influence this regional event, the regional venue, then the impact will become to your countries. That's the reality. For example, the nationally determinant contributions, it's being decided at COP. Whatever commitment it's being decided at this multinational level meeting, then come to the country, you have to adopt it as part of your policies and regulation. So I mean, that's how, I mean, if you're talking about the policy and regulations, you know, not in overall impact. I think that's from me. Thank you. Over to you.
Did you want to? Yeah, go.
Yeah, also I resonate with Rule sir, but here I have an observation that we know that in Asia Pacific we are some 5-6 regions are there. So if we can build some effective regional coalition, like in this Indian subcontinent, we have SAARC. So through these regional platforms, we can address such common international issues, which can be even effective in our national level as well as the neighboring countries. So through that platform, we can really bring such changes, wherein it will impact our national issues as well as internationally also it will influence. But here one thing we have to ensure that the benefit of such outcomes should be equally available to all the participant or all the members of that coalition. When it comes to an international coalition of some 5-6 countries of a region in Asia. So I think through this we can initially address the local issues, and then eventually this can be taken up as a model in international platform in Asian area, mostly in Asian countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, do any of the speakers from the previous session want to address that question? Because I think it sort of applies across the board. You're very welcome to jump in. If not, we have a final question to ask. Okay, we'll go with the final question. And again, I think we'd all like to hear from both of you on this. It's back to practical tips again. Do you have any practical tips for engaging scientists to support our advocacy? Do you think it would be more difficult for grassroots groups to get involved in this kind of policy advocacy because scientists are more likely to want to be affiliated with larger organizations? Or do you think, yeah, so the likelihood of smaller advocacy organizations being able to work with prominent scientists, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can start. When you're talking about the prominent science, again, the question is who are they? Are they like the Avenger, you know, very exclusive one? I mean, when talking about scientists, we cannot be trapped on the personalized this, you know, means that scientists should be based on science, based on the science framework, science of thinking, you know. That's the most important thing. So we can have a debate on that, you know. Somehow we always trap with the scientists because, oh, this is really prominent. Yes, they can make credibility, you know, in a sense, but somehow the most important things for us as you know, small organizations, we have to start to thinking scientifically, you know. Please observe and process your data scientifically, you know, rather than you come to the scientists and then, okay, give it credibility. Yes, because I found also credible scientists who also being paid by the corporations, you know, to make some justifications. I mean, this is something that also, this is we heard a lot of scandalous, you know, scientists. so that's something that yeah, just heard about have you heard about this the scientists who deny climate change, you know? And yeah, I mean, again, so what the most important things for us is trying to get scientific thinking, you know, scientific approach, not the scientist itself. I mean, that's for the start. Thank you.
Very excellent points. Very good points. And to close out the day, Dr. Chatterjee, what are your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I would like to present my thought in that way, that we require scientists in our advocacy. So our approach, the way we work, like grassroots organizations, that should be based on science. But when we present our work, we can take the advice from scientists, but not be biased by their own discretions. That's my finding here. So if a scientist is having some preconceived notion and is trying to lead us according to his or her own way of thinking, so we must be conscious about that. We must accept the suggestion, but or we must approach in such a way that our way of our approach is not biased by or influenced by any personal agenda of science. Like I presented in my presentation also, that scientists should be unbiased while thinking of the issue and presenting the fact in policy framing. So this leveraging of science and policy, engaging the scientists in policy is an inseparable component. We cannot, in my opinion, in today's issues, the way we are handling the issues and the issues we are addressing, they require scientific input in a great extent. But we need to be careful while taking the input that should not make us, that should not dilute the magnitude of issue we are addressing. So we need to be careful in that while engaging the scientists in policy advocacy. This is my take. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank both of you. I think that is the end of our question and answer session for today, and I will pass it back over to Nyoken to say good evening, good afternoon, whatever it is where you are. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Brooke. Thank you everyone for attending our event, and thank you Dr. Chatterjee, Amelia and Rui for very well informed and practical sessions. I would like to conclude today's sessions with a brief introduction of upcoming events. Please find in the chat box a link to leave your feedback for our webinar. You are welcome to share any ideas on how we can improve the qualities of our events and also suggest new ideas for future sessions. On December 1st, we will dedicate a session entirely to discuss CITES, or the Conventions on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, and any issues related to it. It'll be entitled Introduction into CITES, what it is, how it is relevant, and future outlooks. And in October, as many of you know, we have two major physical events, both in Malaysia, in-person events, both in Malaysia. Coming up first is Asia Farm Animal Day from October 8 to 10 in Kuala Lumpur. More information can be found at asiafarmanimalday.com. Last but not least, our Sarawak conference, organized between October 11 and 14, will take place at Kuching, Sarawak, Malaysia. Registration's information can be found on the website also. If you have any questions and queries about today's event or would like to connect with the Policy Coalitions and its member, please let me know via email, policy@asiaforanimals.com. And we welcome any ideas for suggestions for improvement as well as initiative for collaborations. We would like to help organizations think of the big picture together and be a united voice for animals in Asia. To that end, any contributions are valuable. Thank you once more for participating in our event, and see you in December.
Thank you for organizing this, Nyoken, and good night, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day.